The American author Gore Vidal is renowned for his novels, his historical fiction, his essays, his public debates, and his constant baiting and taunting of the American establishment. This week sees the publication of 3 of his books: the republication of Myra Breckenridge, the transsexual fantasy, the publication of a book of essays called Armageddon, which has already kicked up an immense amount of controversy in America, and of his latest historical novel, Empire. He has homes in Hollywood, southern Italy, and here in Rome, and it's here, amid the ruins of one empire, that we've come to talk to him about the rise and fall of another.
Well, most empires must begin somewhere, so there's the Roman Empire, which began on the Tiber River about 800 BC, right here in this extremely noisy city. 7 hills, a river, and then gradual expansion throughout the known world. And that would be the equivalent of the 13 original British colonies with which the United States began. I remember I was about 13 or 14 when I first saw these maps go up. Before the war in 1939, Benito Mussolini, the dictator, wanted to restore the old Roman Empire, and I thought it was very optimistic for a small Italy to try and recreate its past imperial greatness. Now here we see it at the time of the Punic Wars, which were, for the Romans, the equivalent of 1898 to 1907, my subject and empire, which is how we made our first great expansion, and we ended up in the Pacific Ocean with the Philippine Islands, and the empire really began. Now here you see the Roman Empire absolutely at its peak under the Emperor Trajan. It includes all of the known world, and the Romans were the dominant power on earth. The equivalent to that would be, for the United States, the period from about 1945 to the present day, when you find our bases in Latin America, Australia, New Zealand, Western Europe. We are everywhere. So our empire is now global. Theirs was local, but ours is breaking up, and theirs did last 500 years.
It's a very powerful conjunction, this publication of the novel Empire and the book of essays at the same time, because they reflect on each other in so many different ways. But in the novel, you talk about the founding of the American Empire at the end of the 19th century in terms of playfulness, responsibility, sincerity, certain characteristics which are not all bad. You write about it in your essays, the American Empire continuing and ending in terrible corruption, dangerous stupidity, and something that is as evil as the empire it's invented to oppose.
Well, the empire goes through like, it's an organism like any other, and the second law of thermodynamics always obtains. Everything is running down, so you're never going to sustain, your first fine burst. I think that where we went off the track, which obviously I don't deal with in the novel, but I do deal with in the essays, because they bring us up to date, is the decision that was made between roughly 45 and 1950 to maintain a permanent garrison state, to have bases in every country in the world, to dominate every political situation everywhere, to put in governments that would only do our bidding. And in the process, we allowed our internal society to fall apart. There is no public education system. It just stopped. They don't teach them anything. They can't. The inner cities, we have about 4 different race wars going. The inner cities are unlivable. There is no health care. I mean, it is an embarrassment for somebody who cares about the country to see what is being done to it in the name of this empire, which I don't use too ironically in the title of the novel, but I certainly use it with great irony and distaste for the mess that we have now made of our own society and the mess that we have made of the rest of the world. And it was the evil empire, is what we went for, and it was Harry Truman, in order to make his own political base at the time of Roosevelt's death. He did it in about 2 weeks. He moved to grab everything in the country in the way it was a palace revolution. And he was given a marvelous card to play, the atomic bomb, which he'd never even heard of, was handed to him. Set it off, he said. Set off 2 of them. We're going to scare Stalin. We're going to put him back in his box. We're going to scare the Allies. We're going to hold on to this empire all around the world. And what did he do? He said the Russians are coming. They'd lost 20 million people. Stalin didn't even have machines to take his artillery out of Europe. They used horses. And here we are with all this modern army and so forth and so on. And he got America in 5 years, terrified of the Russians were coming. Harry Truman puts in military conscription of every young man in the country, something that is practically unconstitutional and unheard of in peacetime when we're the masters of the world. I mean, this is the greatest con trick ever done. And in the process, we've lost the goddamn republic and we've lost the empire because we've run out of money. And all this happened in my lifetime. So if I cannot lead the state, I will damn well lead the people to see what has happened to it.
Gore Vidal is well placed for the task. He was born and brought up in the American capital, Washington, D.C., where his blind grandfather, T.P. Gore, was Oklahoma's first United States Senator and a Democrat.
But seeing, after all, is a mere matter of habit. It doesn't require physical sight to discern the deplorable condition in which our people are laboring today.
His father, a career civil servant, was head of the Federal Aviation Bureau, enabling the young Gore Vidal to become the youngest boy to fly an aircraft.
This one's okay, says Eugene Vidal, Assistant Secretary for Aviation.
It was a highly political family. His stepsister, Jacqueline Bouvier, was to marry the American President, John Kennedy, while Gore Vidal himself has run twice for public office. In 1982, he came second to Jerry Brown in the race for the Democratic nomination for a California Senate seat.
Once again, I will take this occasion once again to speak louder.
His platform was based on reducing armament spending in order to invest more in public services such as education. But he's best known as one of America's most popular writers. As well as bestsellers like Myra Breckinridge, Vidal has written a series of critically and commercially successful historical novels, describing the major events of American history from independence to the Second World War. He once described himself as the biographer of America.
Well, that's a rather grand word that I use because I couldn't think of any other word to describe what it is that I am doing or might be doing. I didn't start out to do it. I drifted into it. And now, the country, you see, is only... my life has been 1/3 of that of the Republic. And my life plus Senator Gore, my grandfather, was 2/3 of the Republic. So it's a family affair to me. And I'm very at home with it. So I've gone from Burr to Lincoln, 1876, Empire, Washington. There may be 2 more, and that'll bring us to date.
His latest novel, Empire, is set at the turn of the century during the presidencies of William McKinley, a distant relation of Vidal's, and Theodore Roosevelt, a time when America invaded both Cuba and the Philippines, a period of expansion and global muscle flexing, which Vidal sees as the start of the American empire.
In the first moving pictures ever to record a presidential inauguration, here is William McKinley as he becomes the 25th President of the United States. Although he was a great advocate of national preparedness and peace, it was during his administration that the shocking news from Admiral Dewey of the sinking of the Maine in Havana Harbor in 1897 stirred the American people to declare war on Spain and crush her in 3 short months, thus liberating oppressed Cuba. During this campaign, there rose to prominence Theodore Roosevelt and his famous Rough Riders. He was elected to the vice presidency in 1900, in McKinley's second term. And a few months later, when McKinley was assassinated at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, he became the chief executive.
Vidal's historical novels are based on meticulous research. This enables him to reconstruct rather than invent presidential conversations. His sources include the diaries of McKinley's Secretary of State, John Hay.
You may be tired, sir, but you've accomplished a great deal more than any president since Mr. Lincoln, and even he didn't acquire an empire for us, which you have done. Hay laid it on with sincerity. McKinley liked having it laid on. Who does not, thought Hay. But the Major was too shrewd not to anticipate fortune's capriciousness. We're going to have to decide in the next weeks whether we are really going to set up shop in the empire business or not. There is a question. Hay sat up very straight and was rewarded with what felt like a meat cleaver falling hard on his lower spine. Oh, Mr. Hay, there is the biggest question of all in my mind. McKinley looked oddly bleak for someone whose whole physiognomy was essentially, cheerfully convex. I came here to help the backbone of this country, business. That's what our party's all about. We are for the tariff. We are for American industry first, last, and always. And we have a very big country right here to look after. Now we've got to decide if we really want to govern several million small, brown heathens who live half the world away from us.
McKinley was not an enthusiast at the beginning, but he certainly became one. I think you have to give Brooks Adams was the thinker involved, kind of a madman, but very good geopolitician before the word was invented. Admiral Mann, who wrote England and Sea Power, was the military theoretician. Theodore Roosevelt's contribution, he was Assistant Secretary of the Navy in 1898, and his great contribution was he saw a war coming with Spain. They wanted to pick a weak empire, a weak colonial empire, one that we could beat. We almost took the British on over Venezuela, and then it was pointed out that we might have lost that one, so then we picked the Spanish, who were really very weak. And it was Roosevelt who made the crucial decision to send Admiral Dewey to, I think it was Hong Kong first, and so that he'd be in striking distance of the Philippines, put him in touch with the Philippine insurgents against the Spanish government, and we were supposed to help liberate them. Instead, we conquered them, and we broke our word to them. The usual story. So it was already, Admiral Mann's thesis was that you have a great fleet, then you must have colonies to provide the money for the fleet, which gives you more fleet, gives you more colonies, hence more empire.
Another very powerful character in the novel is William Randolph Hearst. Many people will think of Citizen Kane when they think of Hearst, the creator of the powerful and sensational American press. Indeed, the final confrontation in the novel is between Hearst, the press baron, and Roosevelt, the president, vying for who invented America, in a sense, invented the American empire. What attracted you to Hearst? Why did you spend so much time on him?
Hearst and Theodore Roosevelt are sort of on parallel tracks, where Roosevelt and his three friends are creating the empire intellectually and doing it from within the government, sending Dewey and the fleet and so on. Hearst is inventing the idea of the empire, remember the Maine and buy the Journal. It was all over New York City. He grasped a number of things. One was that if there was no news for the day, you invented it. Two, you didn't have to bear any relation to any facts at all. You were there to entertain the masses. Three, you could use this for your own political ends, and he was very ambitious, and he had a very good shot at being the president. The conversation was plainly not going where Roosevelt had intended. Your press incites violence and class hatred. Do you deny that? I don't deny or affirm anything. Do you understand that? I'm here at your request, Roosevelt. Personally, I have no wish to see you at all, anywhere, ever. Unless, of course, we share the same quarters in hell. So I must warn you, no one says, do you deny to me in my country. Your country, is it? Roosevelt's falsetto had deepened to a mellifluous alto. When did you buy it? In 1898, when I made war with Spain and won it. All my doing that was, none of yours. Ever since then, the country's gone pretty much the way I've wanted it to go, and you've gone right along, too, because you had to. You exaggerate your importance, Mr. Hearst. You understand nothing, Mr. Roosevelt. Hearst's pale, close-set eyes were now directed straight at Roosevelt. The effect was cyclopean, intimidating. First, I'd say it makes no difference at all who sits in that chair of yours. The country is run by the trusts, as you like to remind us. They've bought everything and everyone, including you. They can't buy me. I'm rich. So I'm free to do as I please, and you're not. In general, I go along with them, simply to keep the people docile for now. I do that through the press. Now, you're just an office holder. Soon you'll move out of here, and that's the end of you. But I go on and on, describing the world we live in, which then becomes what I say it is. Long after no one knows the difference between you and Chester A. Arthur, I'll still be here. And on that note, I leave it wide open. I mean, it's how you want to determine. It's what is truth, what is history. I find one thing, I get occasionally historians get annoyed at me for poaching on their turf. They say, well, where are his primary sources? Well, what are the primary sources for that period? Newspapers. I have hardly ever read anything about myself in the newspapers that I knew that was not untrue, either through malice or incompetence, or I put in a negative and they took the negative out, so the sentence is exactly the opposite of what I said. Now, if that happens to me, a very minor figure, what on earth are you going to do with a major figure like Theodore Roosevelt, where everything you read is distorted by political passion or whatever? So primary texts, I mean, history is nothing but agreed upon facts.
There's an intriguing suggestion in Empire that somehow a number of influential Brits decided that they'd run out of steam, and so they'd pass on the white man's burden, Kipling's phrase, to America, and that this was done in a kind of subterraneous transatlantic pact, and the Americans took it up.
Yes, there were. It was quite startling, and I don't think it's very well known in England that Curzon was part of it. Balfour was very important. Many of them were souls, and they kept up a very good relationship with a man called White, who was permanently at our embassy. He was brought up partly in England, partly in Italy. And he was the link, and then with John Hay, and then with Henry Adams and his brother Brooks Adams. They were very close to this group of ruling class Britons. Joe Chamberlain was another one. Many of whom had American wives. So there was a little clique in the two countries that worked very hand in glove. And England pushed us, I don't think we needed much pushing, but toward annexing Hawaii. Said, oh, you have to have it. Some people say, well, why? I mean, well, you just have to have it. You have to have Samoa, too. So if you don't get it, the Germans will get it. I mean, the Brits always had some reason like that for it. But indeed, they thought that we were an extension of themselves, not realizing, as England does not realize to this day, how different Americans are.
Yeah.
We're another race.
Bless thou our president.
We have a threefold primary responsibility. Number one, get people saved. Number two, get them baptized. Number three, get them registered to vote.
Register and then vote. And as a Christian, I exhort you as your pastor and as your brother to vote for those candidates who best exemplify the moral and the godly attributes that we see in our beloved Bible.
I'm sick and tired of hearing about all of the radicals and the perverts and the liberals and the leftists and the communists coming out of the closets. It's time for God's people to come out of the closets, out of the churches, and change America.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States and Dr. Jerry Falwell.
For those, and I am one, who have been totally mystified by our president's weird indifference to the general welfare at home and the preservation of peace abroad, the most plausible answer has now been given in a deeply alarming book called The Late Great Planet Earth by an ex-riverboat captain, Hal Lindsey, whose account of the ultimate showdown between Christ and Antichrist was much admired by Ronald Reagan as well as by the 18 million other Christian fundamentalists who bought the book in the 1970s and who believe that we are living in the penultimate dispensation. Let me explain about that. During the last but one dispensation, these are 7-year periods as predicted, Christ will defeat the Antichrist at Armageddon, some 55 miles north of Tel Aviv. Just before the battle, the church will be wafted to heaven, and all the good folks will experience rapture, is their word for it. The wicked will suffer horribly. Then, after 7 years of burying the dead, so presumably there will be survivors, God returns bringing peace and joy and the raptured ones. This gospel is preached daily by such American television divines as Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, currently a candidate for president, Jimmy Swaggart, Jim Baker et al. And according to a 1984 poll, 39% of the American people believe in the death of Earth by nuclear fire and in rapture. Among the 39% is Ronald Reagan.
I can only add to that, my friends, that I continue to look to the scriptures today for fulfillment and for guidance. Indeed, it is an incontrovertible fact that all the complex and horrendous questions confronting us at home and worldwide have their answer in that single book.
This, Mr. President, is a convention of preachers, Bible-believing, Christ-loving, Christ-exalting preachers. And I might add, preachers who like the way you do things.
The title essay in your collection, Armageddon, which I think is going to be a key essay about the last third of the century in United States politics, is that you nail President Reagan as a fundamentalist Christian, as a man who really believes that there will be a battle at a place called Armageddon, 55 miles northeast of Tel Aviv, between the forces of good, America, and the forces of evil, Russia, and he himself believes that to be literally true.
He has indeed said those things. Now, I've always assumed, like any decent American president, that he was a hypocrite. I mean, our system...
You're banking on it, you mean?
Well, I was banking on it. Our system, like yours, is based upon hypocrisy, at least our political arrangements. And suddenly, a lot of research has been done into, does he really believe all this, or is it just to amuse certain of his parishioners? And the book that I was quoting from, by Grace Halsell, has a lot of evidence there that he does indeed believe this nonsense, that there is to be a day of judgment, and it will be nuclear war. And he thinks it's going to happen within a 7-year dispensation. So where are we? Is this the 5th year, the 6th year, what? His mother was a devoted, George Will has written a very good book about the youth of Reagan, and his mother was a disciple of Christ, which is one of the fundamentalist sects. So I read this with gathering horror, because I never took it very seriously. I just thought he was playing up to his constituents. Now, if he really believes it and is 76 and may have to go to jail for all of his crimes against the Constitution of the United States and the laws of the land, which he has sworn faithfully to uphold but did not, who knows what diversion? I mean, this whole nonsense in the Gulf, Persian Gulf, is a diversion from the Walsh Committee, which is going to start indicting a lot of Reagan's people and put them in jail. So what better thing than have a small war going? And if you have a little nuclear war going, that would be absolutely, diversionary.
The title essay, called Armageddon, has been published for the first time in England. You found it very, very difficult to get it published in the United States, and as we talk here now, it hasn't yet been published there.
Well, it's a very delicate subject. What I said in it, I've been critical a couple of times before, that I am on the left side of the political spectrum in America, and my allies for 30, 40 years had been the Jewish intellectuals of New York, who were also liberal. And the old Partisan Review, for which I wrote, the New York Review of Books, which I do write for. With the invention of Israel, a great many of them have defected from the left and have gone to the far right. And they've made what I think I've called an unholy alliance with the anti-Semitic Jesus Christers, the television evangelicals, like Jerry Falwell. What they've done, very cynically, in order to keep money coming into the Pentagon, which people like me try to stop because we think that's what's destroyed the country, it's been the so-called defense budget, There they've made this alliance with passionate anti-Semites who love the state of Israel because the good book says that there's going to be Armageddon any minute and God is going to come down, played by Charlton Heston, you know, with Ronald Reagan as the best friend yet again. And there'll be a battle 55 miles northeast of Tel Aviv at the town of Armageddon. Nuclear, of course, Russia versus the United States, and it'll be the end of the world. My piece, Armageddon, is really about the alliance between the evangelical Christians who don't know any better and the Jewish intellectuals who do know a lot better and are using them cynically in order to get money.
$5 million a year, you cite, going to...
$5 billion. Billion. And it's not even loans, it's grants and aid, which means you never pay it back.
But why has it been so difficult to get that essay published in the USA?
Nothing critical of Israel can be published. I mean, yes, I could go to The Nation, where I've published 2 pieces on that subject. The Nation has a very small circulation. Now, this is what happens when you publish there. I said a few disciplinary things, once again, about this unholy alliance and how I thought the Israel lobby was highly mistaken and was self-defeating by making the alliance. Well, what do they do immediately? Nobody reads The Nation. It's 35,000 people. Mr. William Safire of the New York Times Syndicate, 500 newspapers, Mr. Krauthammer, there are 3 or 4 others, nationally syndicated columnists in every newspaper, then attack me for being an anti-Semite.
What you're saying is something that's very distressing, really, and also very worrying, because there are so many fine American Jewish writers and so many fine American Jewish liberal intellectuals to have sort of turned, what you're suggesting, they've turned into a rump of a rabid jingoism.
Oh, no, you can't generalize that much. I mean, after all, the greatest enemies of the lobby are people like Noam Chomsky, who cannot be published anywhere now. The New York Times won't print him, the New York Review won't print him. He's a dedicated enemy and one of the great figures of the 20th century. He's been silenced quite effectively.
Because of criticizing the state of Israel?
Yes. Yeah. And in fact, Chomsky, whenever he has anything important to say, will often publish it here in Italy in Il Manifesto, because he knows it'll be printed. And somehow it may come back. And they're small magazines where you can be heard. But in the main line, there is no debate, there is no discussion. The roads are closed. I'd say what's really more open, I have a group of friends within Israel who belong to the Peace Now movement. Israel, everything is discussed, everything is open. Absolutely. It's just New York, that the reign of terror, and throughout the United States. And this is not only unhealthy, I don't basically care much about the Israel versus Arab war. That's no business of mine. I am horrified of the Pentagon budget. This is my approach to it. I want to cut that budget. Well, they've joined all the right-wingers saying we must put all of our money into defense because Israel and Lockheed and Northrop and Boeing and the politicians will all benefit.
Another dimension to the essay is that Reagan, whom you call the acting president with a capital A, is there bought by, propelled by, sustained by, and responsible mainly to the defense interests, the men who make the machines, the corporations who make who serve the Pentagon, that he's their puppet.
Sure. California is a defense state. All the politicians, almost without exception, are paid for by them. And the circle of corruption it's perfect. What happens is the Russians are coming, screams the president. They're ahead of us in Kleenex, or saddle soap. And they're on the march everywhere. Nicaragua is about to go over the border in Greyhound buses and kill and loot. So Congress gets hysterical, and they'll appropriate $20 billion for defense. The Defense Department then takes the $20 billion and divides it up among Lockheed, Northrop, and so on. And they, in turn, give the money back to the politicians for their campaigns. And that's the way the country is run. We have another little detail which has come along. If this gets really boring, slump forward in your chair. But what we have is a fascinating thing now is that only 50% of our people vote in elections. 50% never vote. I'm one of them. 50% don't vote for president. Now, something like 30 to 40% of the American people work for the federal government, state government, municipal government, and another 10% or so are on welfare. So you've got 45% of the people are government employees or supported by government, and only 50% vote. You now have not a government by the people, you have a government by government. So the lock is in. Now, the only way you can break that is cut these vast subsidies to places like the Pentagon. But you can't do that if you have Israel firsters over here and Jesus Christers over here and unholy alliance, so...
And you think it's too far gone, frankly, don't you? The tone of your essays is that it's too far gone.
Oh, it's all over.
Would wreck the system to clean out the corruption. Corruption holds together the system at a certain point, doesn't it?
Yes, sort of like rotted vines holding together a rotted house. But I think that it will fall apart. I think the depression has begun. The American currency is going, its value goes down. The debts, national debt's over $2 trillion. We're the largest debtor nation in history, larger than Argentina, Brazil, and so on combined. So I think you're going to see a major depression in which we give up our imperial pretensions. Lucky little England may cease to be our aircraft carrier. You know how we occupied you? It was one of the great stunts. Harry Truman had a nice sense of humor and was the most imperial figure in human history after Julius Caesar. Truman decided to put the United States on a permanent wartime footing, garrison state. CIA was invented not to spy on the Russians. It was to keep our allies like you under our control. First thing the CIA did in 48 and 49 was infiltrate the trade unions so they wouldn't go leftist in Germany, Italy, England. Stalin let off this little atomic bomb, and Harry Truman said, "Oh, poor England, you're so close to Joseph Stalin, this evil man, he was going to blow you up. We'll send you some B-29 planes, and they will protect you from Stalin," and they're still sitting there. And why you don't tell them to go is beyond me.
Well, some people do tell them to go, but...
their voices are lost upon the wind.
Their voices are lost in the wilderness of Greenham Common.
20 years I have rented a small penthouse on top of the moldering 17th century Origo Palace in the middle of what bureaucratic Romans call the historic center and everyone else calls Old Rome. The palace is at the northwest corner of a busy square that has all the charm of New York City's Columbus Circle, plus, below street level, 3 classical temples, home to a colony of cats, a millennial reminder that this precinct was once sacred to the goddess Isis, and the cat was and is her creature. From the south terrace, we can see a corner of the Victor Emmanuel Monument, a snowy white wedding cake in the form of an antique Remington Rand typewriter. A bit of the Campidoglio, the Aventine Hill, the synagogue, the Dome of San Carlo, and directly below us, the 18th century Teatro Argentina, where the Barber of Seville was booed on opening night, while Rossini sat next door at Bernasconi's eating pastry. By and large, the shops are exactly like the shops of 2,000 years ago as preserved at Pompeii and Ostia. A single deep room with a wide door that can be shuttered and a counter at the back. Produce is displayed on benches or tables on the sidewalk or in the doorway. Fresh food in season is all important here, and we talk a lot about food. The herb shop, we Americans don't pronounce the H, has been doing business for over a century. Dark wooden paneling and drawers, porcelain apothecary jars with gilt Latin inscriptions. An old woman suddenly turns to me in a state of ecstasy. "I am 90 years old," she says, "and everything in the streets changed except this place. It's the same. The same." That, I fear, is the retrograde joy of our village life. Even our lunatics are always the same. For decades now, the flower woman goes out each day in the bus to the cemetery to steal flowers from new graves. Then she returns to the street and sits in the doorway of a deconsecrated church and makes up bouquets. We are worried lately about her loss of the last set of dentures. Yes, we are all growing old. But a baby's being born to the wife of the hardware store owner, while a half dozen babies of a few years ago are now men and women. So, plenty more where we came from. That is the lesson of the street. We had one of our numerous doomed presidents came here to campaign, Jimmy Carter, who could not set a foot right. And he was running against Ronald Reagan. He came here surrounded by press. The first thing they said was, under no circumstances, he was having trouble with the Jewish vote. Do not let him near the Arch of Titus. So Carter, who marched inexorably toward doom wherever he was, saw the Arch of Titus where we are, and he said, "And what is that?" And they said, "That's the Arch of Titus, Mr. President. Now, would you come over here?" "No, I want to see that." And then he said, "Now, what is that?" And the man with sinking heart said, "That is the sack of Jerusalem." And this, of course, was the time of the Camp David talks, when he was supposed to have sold out Israel. So with that, he went down to a crashing defeat, all as a result of having come here to the old Roman Empire when he should have stayed home in Washington, minding his own business.
There are no votes in Rome, only books.
Only books in Rome, and broken stones, and tourists. I think there's a certain happy symbolism, I suppose, to be living in the ruins of one empire and writing about another one, which is in trouble.
So what's this? Where are we now?
Well, we're in what they call the crypto portico. And these are a series of corridors that go underneath the Palatine, the palaces, the complex of the emperor.
Yeah.
And they connect up. This particular one connects up with the stadium. And when the emperors wanted to move privately, stealthily, quietly around the palace here, they would go underground. And this was to protect them from assassins, it was to protect them from people, importunate people. And this particular one is rather notable because it was here that the Emperor Caligula was murdered on his way back from the stadium. And they would have guards assigned all along here, and even if you were the emperor, you had to give the password, which was changed every day. And he was rushing along, there was a murder plot against him, and they said, "What's the password?" And he said something, "Oh, why don't you boil your head?" or some ancient Roman expression. They said, "All right," and there you go, Malcolm McDowell, and dead as a mackerel he was. I did not see the film Caligula, based upon my work, but I'm told it was one of the truly all-time bad movies. I don't see these pictures because I have high blood pressure. I've never seen Visit to a Small Planet. I have never seen Myra Breckinridge. I've never seen Caligula. Imagine to be talking about profane things in a corridor where an emperor was murdered. But, be that as it may...
Assassination seems to be one of the things that this empire and your empire have in common, isn't it?
Well, it's one way of getting rid of them. I must say, of the first 12 Caesars, how many got it? Quite a few did. And then we started killing presidents with Abraham Lincoln, or anybody who threatens change in the American empire almost always receives a mysterious bullet, always from a lone, crazed killer. Now, get this as your literary program. Hardly anybody in the United States can write a postcard, much less keep a diary. Every single assassin of presidents, or would-be presidents, the would-be assassin of George Wallace, of Jack Kennedy, of Bobby Kennedy. everyone kept a diary showing I am a lone crazed killer. We often think the CIA had a hand in those diaries.
Same handwriting, same style.
Same style,
same
phrase.
Paranoia. Same phrase, lone crazed killer strikes again.
It's a very curious thing about assassination and power amongst emperors. On at least 4 occasions, Jack Kennedy discussed with me his assassination. How easy it would be to kill him. And I would say, well, does it bother you? Well, he said, of course it bothers me. But he said, there's nothing you can do about it. You've got to be fatalistic. And I said, my God, they could so easily shoot you. But they'd probably miss and hit me and kill me. He said, no great loss. "20 years ago, that well-known wit and man about town, John F. Kennedy, said, Washington perfectly combines Southern efficiency with Northern charm. The pre-war decision to make an imperial Roman, literally Roman, capital out of what had been originally a pleasant, Frenchified Southern city was, in retrospect, a mistake.
This building is the symbol of the distinctive character of our republic.
I can remember that when such Roman palaces as the Commerce Building were being built, we used to wonder rather innocently how these huge buildings could ever be filled up with people. At least they will make wonderful ruins, said my grandfather, turning his blind eyes on the Archives building. He was never a man to spend public money on anything if he could help it. But those Piranesi blocks of marble eventually became real buildings that soon filled up with real bureaucrats. And by the end of the Second World War, Washington had a real world empire to go with all those, to my eyes at least, bogus Roman sets. The entire Roman Empire under the Emperor Augustus was governed from this one small building with about 6 clerks, or clerks as you would say, and the filing system. The Roman Empire was built on 2 things. One was the first real filing system, and the other was cement. Together they brought together the filing system and cement, and Augustus ran the entire thing. His house was down there, a very small house. They call it the House of Livia now. And this little office, he ran the world. And when I look around Washington and see what we have built to lose the world, I grow meditative.
In 1986, Vidal was one of the international group of artists and celebrities invited to Moscow by President Gorbachev for the Glasnost conference.
Well, it was a most impressive occasion, trivialized, needless to say, by the press and the Western world, which exists for that. To read the American press, you would have thought that only Yoko Ono had been there. And yet I sat between Norman Mailer and Pierre Trudeau. It was a most extraordinary turnout. And what I liked about Gorbachev was the simplicity of it. He said nothing that was not true, which is not easy for any politician to do. He didn't say the whole truth. No politician's allowed to do that. But what he said was perfectly sensible. He said Chernobyl frightened us. Can you imagine an American president saying, well, 3 Mile Island really gave me a scare? I mean, nothing has ever gone wrong in the United States or the United Kingdom. These are perfect countries. No politicians would ever admit a mistake. Gorbachev said, you know, if something like that could happen, that was a minor accident in a minor plant. Now, suppose one of the missiles went off just by accident. So the fallout would be 10,000 times that. You in Wales are having trouble with your lambs to this day. We have troubles here in Italy, down in the south where I have a house. It was pretty brutal. Then he went on to say that the time has come really to get rid of these things. He told a funny story about, he didn't mention Reagan by name, but he said, when I was in Vienna, I saw the American president. And he said, the president rather surprised me. He said, if we were invaded by Mars, the Soviet Union and the United States would be allies. And Gorbachev said, well, I said, I think it's premature to get ready for this one, for this invasion, but we do have a common enemy here on Earth, which is nuclear weapons. Why don't we get rid of them? And Gorbachev then went on talking. But he said, I want to see these things gone by the end of the century. They're too dangerous to have around. They're not tactically useful. And we all applauded. And Gorbachev, he was reading from a speech on a blue binder, and he put down the binder. He said, you know, I expected warmer applause on that. So we all made a lot more noise. Oh, that's better. And went on. What I think he's doing, which is extraordinary, and he can't say it because he'd be in trouble with his own people. It would drive the Americans mad if they could work it out. He's disarming unilaterally. I mean, they let 4 of our generals, congressmen, look at that place in Siberia, one of the things, part of the evil empire that we've always wanted to get into. It's just pretty bogus, you know, it's all broken down and not very ominous, or as the late Darrell Zanuck would say, omnious. Not omnious at all. I think he's doing that because he wants to put the money into the domestic sector. Now, that is exactly what I want to do in the United States, and that is what all the shootouts I've been having of late with various dominations and powers within my own native land. I think that the 2 empires have run out of gas. The world is dominated by Germany and Japan economically. I think eventually there'll be an alliance between Russia and the United States. We are contiguous. We have more in common than not. They're dying to be Americans, and we would like to get our hands on all that wealth. And I came away from Gorbachev in Moscow thinking, I thought 2 things. 1, the world is going to be safer. 2, what on earth is the ruling class of my native land going to do? Because we've had nothing for 45 years, but the evil empire and the Russians are on the march. And of course, when the world was divided up, we got everything. Vernon Walters, this very fat general who goes around making trouble around the world in the name of the United States president. He's officially ambassador to the United Nations, but wherever there's a trouble spot, there is Vernon. Vernon and I have arguments. Vernon's big and sort of Jesuitical. And he said, you know, since the Second World War, have you watched how the Soviet Union has expanded? They've got all the big ones. They've won everything. And what has happened to us? We're falling behind and so forth. And I finally said, you know, Vernon, you're so used to talking to very stupid people, like the president. I said, don't talk to me like that. Let me tell you about how the Second World War ended. Stalin was locked off in his disagreeable little piece of territory, given some buffer states because he was very nervous about invasion, as well they should be. They have been invaded quite often. They got that. What did we get? We got Western Germany and Western Europe. Now, would you rather have Western Germany or would you rather have Romania? Then we got Japan. They got Poland. We have the Western Hemisphere. We've got Australia. We've got New Zealand. We've got most of the Asian-packed countries. They haven't got, what have they got? Cuba. And on the island of Cuba, we have a Marine base at Guantanamo. Well, I must say, General Walters didn't have much more to say to me, but I heard "commie bastard" being whispered as he turned on his plump heel. But, so I see a number of things happening. 1, the coming depression. 2, we abandon the empire because we can't afford all those bases, and we can't afford, I want us out of NATO, I want us out of Europe, I want us out of the Middle East, I want us certainly out of Latin America. I want to repair the plant of the country, which means having a public educational system again. I see the breakup of the nation state, and it's being replaced by multinationals, by conglomerates. And the one thing about a conglomerate is they do not want a war. I mean, you can just see, if you did have another crazy American president who believes in Armageddon and is all set to blow up the world, you could hear ITT say, oh, no, you're not. We just put up in Moscow a brand new building complex. You don't know it costs the world. You are not taking out Moscow. We're very sorry. If you do, we turn off the money, and you'll have to shut down the White House. So this is the way we're going to be saved by these people eventually, but that's a little further down the road. To maintain a 35 years arms race, it is necessary to have a fearsome enemy. Not since the invention of the Wizard of Oz have American publicists created anything quite so demented as the idea that the Soviet Union is a monolithic, omnipotent empire with tentacles everywhere on Earth, intent upon our destruction, which will surely take place unless we constantly imitate it with our war machine and its secret services. In actual fact, the Soviet Union is a second world country with a first world military capacity. Frighten the Russians sufficiently and they might blow us up. By the same token, as our republic now begins to crack under the vast expense of maintaining a mindless imperial force, we might try to blow them up. Particularly if we had a president who really was a twice-born Christian and believed that the good folks would all go to heaven where they were headed anyway, and the bad folks would go where they belong. Fortunately, to date, we have had only hypocrites in the White House. But you never can tell.
You spent some time in the States then?
Oh, I'm in
Is that 3 months a year?
3 or 4 months a year.